Welcome to Interpersonal Communication. Let's get started with Chapter 1. All right, so this video will define communication, examine 3 models of communication, define interpersonal communication, and then finally we'll examine what communication competence is. Let's begin by answering this question. What is communication? You likely have your own definition that comes to mind, because after all, we do communicate every day, a lot of the day. Communication is the process through which people use messages to generate meanings within and across contexts, cultures, channels, and media. So let's break this down a little bit further. Communication is a process. It requires structure, rules, clarification, and of course, reflection to be accomplished well. Messages are packed with information, and interactions impact the way those messages are sent and received. We also need to consider the context in which a communication encounter occurs. The channel that is being used to send and receive these messages are things like phones, using face-to-face meetings, social media apps, and of course all the various other forms that we have available to us. So now that we have defined communication in detail, let's discuss why we communicate. So why do we communicate? Think of a few reasons for why you think we communicate. You may be thinking of things that we communicate for in order to get our point across, or to build relationships, or to connect with others, to support them. And all of these things are correct, and there's many, many more reasons, right? But the bottom line is we communicate in order to meet our needs as social beings. There are 4 needs that we use communication to meet. These are physical, social, identity, and practical needs. So let's start with physical needs. Physical needs relate to anything with regards to our health, okay? Lack of communication causes poor physical health. And research has shown that just 10 minutes of socialization can improve our health, improve our memory, and boost our intellectual function. Loneliness and social isolation are more and more common today, though. In fact, more common than ever before. And a study that was conducted recently found that loneliness is just as lethal as smoking 15 cigarettes per day. In fact, lonely people are 50% more likely to die prematurely than those with healthy social relationships. So we know that we need to communicate with one another and build relationships, interpersonal relationships, for our health, for our physical health and well-being. We also communicate to meet our identity needs. Communication with others helps us learn who we are and who we want to be. According to a scholar named Skip Downing, there are 3 ways in which significant people in our lives, like parents and siblings, teachers, friends, and family, shape our identity. And this includes how they speak to us, what they say to us, and how they behave around us. And in addition to this, our identity begins to form at birth, and it continues to be shaped over the course of our lifetime. So we communicate for physical needs, identity needs, and social needs. So social needs link us to others so that we can build a social network. These relationships are critical because we are social beings. And more importantly, developing healthy social relationships are critical to mental and, of course, physical health, like we've discussed. Research has shown that the feeling of happiness is linked with successful communication in a study that was conducted among married couples. And this is no surprise, right? Given that relationship conflict leaves us typically feeling unhappy, discouraged, at odds with ourselves and others, it's no surprise that healthy communication would be linked with a feeling of happiness. Okay, now let's examine practical needs. Practical needs help us to get others to behave the way we want them to or need them to in different interactions. So, for example, there's a few examples up on this slide, but we can think about when we go visit a hairdresser. We need to be able to communicate with them and tell them how short we want our hair or what style we want to be able to wear it in. We can also look at household duties. So think about the people that you live with. We need to be able to explain to those people how and when we want to work together in order to complete household chores, like dishes or getting the floors done or doing laundry. This is also critical in the workplace, especially in fields where lives are at risk. So first responders have moments where they have moments to communicate critical information and respond effectively in order to save someone's life. So mistakes can be made when we are unable to communicate practical needs successfully and effectively. Okay, so now we understand the 4 needs as far as why we communicate. Now let's examine the 3 models of communication. So these 3 models are known as linear, interactive, and transactional. The linear model depicts communication as an activity where information flows in one direction. So there's a starting point and an ending point. There must be a message, though, and the sender of the message is the individual who generates the information to be communicated. They package the message and they choose a channel that they use to send it. So this could be texting or emailing or, of course, face-to-face. And then noise. So this model also accounts for noise, which is any factor in the environment that impedes messages from reaching their destination effectively. So this can be smoke, it can be a siren. In technology, it can be due to internet and data outages. So anything that impacts that message from getting where it needs to be effectively is considered noise. And then the receiver is the person for whom the message is intended for and who the message is delivered to. So this model doesn't account for a response. It's just a one-way direction for messages being sent. Now, the interactive model, it does account for response or feedback. It views communication as a process involving senders and receivers. In this model, communication is influenced by 2 factors, feedback and fields of experience. Feedback comprises verbal and nonverbal messages that receivers provide in order to indicate their reaction to communication. And then, so basically response, right? And then field of experience represents the beliefs, attitudes, values, and experience that each participant brings to the communication event. So this is really our self-concepts that we are referring to here, and we're going to talk more about that this semester. But our self-concepts they consist of our beliefs, our attitudes, our values, and of course all the experiences that we've had that shape who we are. The transactional model, the 3rd model, acknowledges communication differently. It acknowledges communication as a unique human process that we do with others and not to others. So this model shows that each person involved in a communication event equally influences the communication behavior of the parties involved. So messages are constantly exchanged between all parties involved in the encounter, which allows for them to be more collaborative, okay, and for meeting to be created as well. And so this model describes our interpersonal relationships most effectively, where the other two models don't quite get us where we want to be as far as that creating that shared meaning and that collaboration together as unique human beings and in our relationships. A major factor that can impact our communication encounters that I've mentioned is noise. And I want to spend a little bit more time on this because there are two types of noise that can impact messages being sent. And I've talked a little bit already about the external noise, anything that impacts the communicative encounter that's external. So music, smoke, heat, rain, external, okay? Internal noise, on the other hand, is noise that is within one or both of the communicators. So this can be physiological or psychological or both. And physiological noise consists of biological factors like not feeling well, maybe feeling tired or hungry, where psychological noise relates to cognitive factors, like thinking about a test you have the next day instead of the problem your friend is telling you about in an interaction. So these factors basically are distracting and they tend to negatively impact the ability for messages to be sent effectively. So now that we have examined the three models of communication and noise, let's spend some time defining interpersonal communication and identifying what communication competence is. So interpersonal communication is a dynamic form of communication between two or more people in which the messages exchanged significantly influence their thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and in relationships. Again, textbook definition, right? But interpersonal communication occurs in our relationships, and these relationships include those who we build a family with, friendships with, romantic partners, our coworkers, and our colleagues at school and in life. So these relationships are personal and they add meaning to our lives, and that's what makes them interpersonal. Okay. We're going to examine each one of these relationships in more detail later on in the semester. Interpersonal communication also creates impact. It changes the participants' thoughts, emotions, behavior, and relationships. And it also takes form in two forms, okay? And this is the I thou and the I it. The I thou communication refers to ways of which relating to each other deepens the bond in those relationships. It affirms individual uniqueness, and the parties involved regard each other as equal. Okay, that's where that collaboration can happen. I it communication, on the other hand, though, it refers to ways of relating that focuses on differences and it amplifies the view of others as an object. It can even be disrespectful and it prevents that collaboration and shared meaning to develop in the relationship. And this is a philosopher known as Martin Buber. And he teaches us that the basic word I thou can be spoken only with one's whole being. The concentration and fusion into a whole being can never be accomplished by me, can never be accomplished without me. I require a thou to become, becoming I say thou. And what this essentially means is that we need others and others need us. We depend on our interpersonal relationships in order to thrive. And we thrive when we are in that I thou relationship or encounter, communication encounter. So interpersonal communication competence, we just defined interpersonal relationships and where those exist in our life, but interpersonal competence, this is achieved by studying communication and applying what you're learning, essentially. It is achieved by communicating with others in appropriate, effective, and ethical ways. So developing interpersonal communication confidence involves 2 steps, both of which require motivation to improve communication. The first one is acquiring knowledge, and the second is translating that knowledge into communication skills. So applying what you're learning. Interpersonal communication competence meets 3 criteria. It needs to be appropriate, means following the accepted norms in society and in those relationships. It needs to be effective, where it enables you to achieve goals. And it needs to be ethical, where we treat each other fairly. That I thou comes back, right? So that I thou is going to be that ethical encounter. And we'll continue to develop and discuss communication confidence throughout this course of the semester. So we've covered quite a lot today. We've spent time defining communication as a concept. We examined the 3 models of communication, which included the linear, interactive, and transactional model. We discussed interpersonal communication and the types of interpersonal relationships that we'll continue to learn about over the course of our semester together. And we identified communication confidence and how we can begin increasing that. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me and we can schedule some time to discuss your questions. Thank you.